Friends, welcome back to Speak Sound Doctrine. We're here in the parlor again. Of course, you remember Ryan and Scott, and we're once again joined by Samuel Johnson. We're so glad that you all are here today, and I'm glad that you're joining us. We've got a fun conversation. I don't know if it's fun or not, but Samuel suggested it, and actually it's very pertinent in light of what's been going on in the recent news this week and this past week regarding the Supreme Court. Specifically, we wanted to talk a little bit about, Samuel, you're going to have to name it, but it's the particular case regarding the coach and his First Amendment rights to express his religious belief. So, first of all, I do want to say it's, if you watched some of our previous episodes about abortion, we do want to say that I see something good is happening with Roe v. Wade being overturned, but the fight's not over. We still got to keep standing strong and keep standing with the faith and keep standing with life. So I just wanted to say, if you go back and watch those, if you've missed any of them. But so what's the name of the official title of this decision?
The official title is Kennedy versus Bremerton School District. And what it was a high school football coach right after the game during the interim where everybody was getting cleaned off in the locker room and everybody's kind of doing their own thing for a few minutes. He'd go out to the 50-yard line and drop to his knee and take a prayer. Eventually, a bunch of his team members would come and pray with him at the 50-yard line. He made a point not to coerce anyone to join him or ask anyone. It was all their own free will. But the school district terminated him because they believed that to keep him on the staff with that kind of behavior going on would be seen as the schools endorsing a religious expression, which under the Supreme Court precedent before this last week, that would probably not have been allowed. So they fired him. He took him to court. The district court ruled in favor of the school. He took it up to the appeals court. They ruled in favor of the school. The Supreme Court overturned. And in overturning the rulings of the district and appellate courts, they also overturned some long-standing Establishment Clause precedent that has kept prayer out of schools and things like Ten Commandments displays out of public buildings like courthouses for quite a long time. So it was a really great day for the free exercise of religion.
Okay. Well, that's good to know, because I'm not familiar with all the language, like, overturning or sending it back down, whatever that stuff. But it's good to know that there seems to be, it's a domino effect type situation where it's not just affecting him, it's a lot bigger than that.
Well, there's a couple of different tests that have been used to determine whether or not a certain exercise or display of religious affiliation is constitutional in the public square. As we all know, the First Amendment prohibits Congress from making any law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting its free exercise. So there's kind of a tension between those two clauses, respecting an establishment or prohibiting the free exercise of it. So, and of course that clause has been applied by the 14th Amendment to the states. So states now cannot establish a religion or prohibit the free exercise of religion. Now, up until just this last week, the two tests that were generally used when evaluating a case like this were the Lemon test from the case Lemon versus Kurtzman and the endorsement test. Typically it was the Lemon, which is a three-part test. It's typically applied to things like Ten Commandments displays. In order for it to be constitutional, number one, the display needs to have a valid secular purpose. So that's why when you do see Ten Commandments displays in public buildings, they're usually associated with other law codes or other parts of cultural and state history, because the historical value is a valid secular purpose. Ten Commandments displays by themselves are almost always unconstitutional because they fail that first prong under the Lemon test. The second prong is that it needs to neither advance nor inhibit religion, so it needs to be basically religiously neutral. And it must not promote an excessive government entanglement with religion. So that the third prong kind of adds a bit of strength to the second one. It can't just be religiously neutral, it has to be the government basically separating itself from any religious purpose. Now, that test was overturned in Kennedy. So this last week, that test is no more. The endorsement test is a little different. It's whether a reasonable person, a reasonable observer, would view the display as a government endorsement of a particular religious belief. That test, too, is now gone. No longer do we have to look for, is the government endorsing a religion? Now the test is basically a history and tradition test.
Mm-hmm.
Is this display very deeply rooted in our nation's history and traditions? This test basically will allow Ten Commandments displays back in courthouses. It may very well allow prayer back in our classrooms. So, yeah.
I've always been intrigued by our First Amendment rights. And certainly it seems that today, especially those who are either on the left or if they're atheists, maybe, I guess you can have a conservative atheist, but by and large, people who are not religious or against religion, especially Christianity, they've always weaponized the First Amendment to not so much a separation of church and state, but it's more of a separation of church or of state from church or something like that. I've heard someone else say it. Maybe you can think of it, Scott, better. But there's this idea that the church and the state just can never interact at all. And unfortunately, that's just an unbiblical model. And I really appreciate, as the lone Presbyterian here, I really appreciate the Westminster Confession's position on the magistrate, and how there's established in there this recognition that these are two very important spheres that have been ordained by God, the government, the magistrate, and the church, the ecclesiastical government, and they're not one on the same, but they also aren't completely separate. Like they support one another. They're there to protect one another. They're there to help bring about the gospel message. And so, I don't know, I've always been, I appreciate the First Amendment, and I know why our founding fathers put it in there. But it's always been one of those challenging things that I have as a kingdom citizen with, being American. And I don't know, maybe I'm going to get shot for saying something like that, but I've always loved that tension, I guess. I don't know, Scott. Oh, I'm looking at you because you're my other patriot. Not that we aren't patriots, but he's got stuff on him, so it's good.
Am I chump change here? I'm not a patriot.
Well, I was just gonna say a few words. Number one, it's good and refreshing to have our almost lawyer on staff. It really is. I love Samuel. We haven't really hung out a lot, but he's very composed. He's very well spoken. He likes to think everything out, unlike me. I like to bang sometimes. I get it, but also too, I thought for a second while he was talking and you were talking that all that Ryan and I were going to be today was just eye candy, and now you got a chuckle out of Ryan. That's fun. He is so biblical. He's so engrossed in the Word.
Yeah.
And we know it's the real Word because it's the King James Bible.
That's right.
And so it's he has definitely got the real Word this morning. But to you guys' point, I was thinking as he was talking, you were talking that, isn't it funny how we have a First Amendment and a Second Amendment and all these amendments that we have, these rights that we have as Americans, but isn't it funny that we can only exercise those rights in places that we're told we can exercise those rights?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Can you speak to that, Samuel? I mean,
Well,
because here we are, and I get common sense comes into play. You can't go into a crowded movie theater and yell fire. I
actually
understand
can.
that.
You actually can. That's constitutionally protected speech under the First Amendment.
Okay, well then, it's not common sense to do it, but yeah.
Right.
But I mean, I get that. But I mean, how come that our rights?
We need to ask permission.
We need to ask
them.
permission.
Yeah.
I need to ask permission. I have to get permission from the state of Virginia and the county of Campbell, where I live, to carry a concealed weapon, when the Second Amendment says I have the right to carry a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand that.
I don't either. It's just a different way where the states have regulated things that the federal Constitution leaves substantially unregulated. It's why the federal government doesn't issue carry concealed carry weapons or licenses. Excuse
Right.
me. I wish they did issue concealed carry weapons, but that's another story.
That's a story I'd like to talk about.
Yeah.
Right. It's substantially a states' rights issue. The states are allowed to regulate the carrying of weapons, particularly to protect people, public safety. Right. There's always a balance between the rights of the individual and the collective. If we are individuals living in society, at some point our individual sovereignty needs to give way before the good of the collective. So there's a balancing act that has to be done between individual liberty and public health and safety, which a lot of states have struck different balances. Some are, concealed carry permit shall issue states, others are may issue states, although
Some
the
are
may issue state status has been struck down by the Supreme Court just
Right,
a
with
couple
New
weeks
York.
ago.
Yeah, with New York.
With the New York
Well,
case.
some
yeah.
are, in some states, they were constitutional carry. They call it constitutional carry, where you don't have to have a permit, and
Right.
you don't have to announce whether or not you have a weapon on
Mhm.
you. Now, personally, I always do, because I don't want to get shot.
Right.
Okay, I got this thing about bullets. I don't want to get hit by one, right?
That's fair.
And so, but going back to the original intent, because we can turn this into a gun thing all day long, especially with me sitting here. But going back to the prayer and everything, I was thinking as he was talking, Christ says in John chapter 15, he's speaking to his disciples before he's ready to go out to be betrayed in the garden. And he's given these last, I guess you want to call it these last minute instructions to his disciples, and he says, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I've chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Now, I'm thinking about this man praying after the football game, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. On his own.
On his own, after the football game. On his own. The crowd, I'm assuming, has left the stadium, right?
No, not necessarily.
Not necessarily,
But they're dispersing.
But they're
or
dispersing.
maybe-
My point is, the game is over. They're dispersing. So here's a man going out to the 50-yard line to pray, not bothering anybody. And yet, what do we see that Christ says? If the world hates you, don't be surprised because it hated me first. And these people that attack this man's quote-unquote First Amendment right, his religious freedom, right?
Yep.
Mhm. Free exercise, yes.
The free exercise of his belief, he's attacked for it. Why? Because the people who attack him ultimately hate Christ.
Well, it's been attacked since the very beginning of the foundation of the Constitution, where we have to go back to why was the Constitution ratified? Why did the Constitution come about? We had a Revolutionary War that separated us from England, and why did we have that war? Is because it was about worship. It was about the freedom to worship. They did not want to be told what to do by the Church of England, but also England itself. And that was a major part of the reason why they wanted to separate, because they had become tired of being pawns on what they could do and could not do. And taxation was another reason, and other reasons that came, but that was a big part of it. They wanted that freedom of religion. That's the reason why. That's the First Amendment. You think about it. Why did they write that as the first? That could have easily been the third, or it could have been the fourth, but it was on their minds, and it was so important to them that they made sure that they had that in there first. Then the second one is just as important, to bear arms, because they wanted the citizens to have the freedom to rise up against a government if they feel like the government became tyranny.
I was gonna say I think what you're saying speaks to the history of why the people came over here in the first place.
Amen.
They came over here in the first place for freedom of religion. Freedom of religion itself wasn't such a big issue in the Revolutionary War because they had been exercising the freedom of religion here for 100 or so years, almost 200 years before the Revolution. But they were afraid that if they let the King of England have his way on taxes, next thing he'd be imposing bishops on them.
Exactly.
So the whole entire and this is why the history and tradition test that was imposed in Kennedy is so important, because that is our history and
Yeah.
tradition.
Amen.
So this is why I'm excited about this case, because if if any display that's consistent with our country's history and tradition is constitutional now, we're going to see a lot more of this. We can get prayer back in our schools. We can get the Ten Commandments back in our courthouses. We can, we can read scripture in public places.
And we can get the Bible back in the school because it's a book,
Mm-hmm.
and they can't, say
But
that's
it's a book. It's a book that people hate.
Well, they're
Well,
going
and-
to always hate Christ. We already know that because Satan has dominion over this air of this world, and the world is the world system is governed by him, and so we have our flesh that goes against him. So yeah, that's true.
Well, and I hate the phrase "devil's advocate," but I'm gonna play devil's advocate
There
here.
we go.
Maybe one day you can tell us where that phrase comes from, because I'm sure you know. But I think this is all good things. I do want to say that I think what's happening is a good thing. I'm not saying that it shouldn't have happened. But the concern that I have is something that I think, so one of the things that we see, with the founding fathers and even with the Puritans that came over in the 1600s, but I guess in particular with the authors of the Constitution, they took for granted things that we can't take for granted today. Jefferson, I don't know if I could say he is in heaven or not, because I don't know. Franklin, I probably hazard a guess he's probably not in heaven. As far as I can tell from the list that I know, there were probably, not that, being reformed is the only way to heaven, but I could probably count on my hand the number of reformed people who signed the Declaration of Independence. And I know of at least one, and that was Witherspoon. There might be more, but so again, that's an aside. Even though I know, Jefferson and his Bible taking out everything, all the miracles of Jesus and stuff like that, that man's a deist. Again, I'm not even sure if he's in heaven or not. But he, as an individual, took for granted assumptions that I think everyone had in the 17th century. I guess in the 18th century. And this notion of, this Judeo-Christian ideology that came to America, today we don't have those assumptions. And what I'm saying is, I'm glad that prayer isn't going to be forbidden in schools. But my concern is that's not going to solve anything. Because just because prayer is going to be allowed in schools doesn't mean parents are going to be praying with their kids. That's where it starts. That's where it needs to happen. Not so much in the school. I actually didn't care that they made prayer illegal in schools, because prayer needs to be happening in the homes in the first place. Prayer needs to be happening around that dinner table with fathers and their wives, with their wife and their children, reading the word, praying with their family. That's where it begins. That's where you instill the foundations of faithfulness. The teachers don't need to be doing that. I don't care if they're religious or not. They are not to be what the role of parents are to be. And again, I'm not blaming teachers. I'm blaming parents. I'm blaming those parents who see the system that we have in place and are making assumptions that we can just my kids can be babysat for 5 hours or 8 hours a day, and I can go do whatever I want. That is the problem. Not so much prayers or not prayers, or 10 commandments or no 10 commandments. The problem is the home has lost the Bible.
Well, we need to tread lightly, and this has opened the door for all faiths. You have the Christian faith, but you have the Islamic faith, you have the Satan church faith, you have other faiths that can introduce prayer, and they can offer prayer.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we might get, what is it called? So tunnel visioned about our own beliefs, and that's what our child is going to be exposed to in the school system. And you're so right, is that we need to make sure that we have a strong foundation with our family unit, and that us as pastors, and I know that you're
Just
a family man, but you're
Just the
You're-
Lord.
I was just messing with him.
but he's pursuing the legal
Yeah.
recourse, which is great. Is that we already know that when we win these battles, it's not a battle for the Christian faith; it's a battle for all faiths, because the First Amendment is not Christian based;
Sure.
it's for all faiths, and we have to always emphasize that the faith begins in the family unit, not the teacher. So let me ask you this question. How does this work when a teacher has a different faith than I do, and they offer prayer, even though it might open the door for prayer, but they offer a prayer to
Allah or someone.
foreign God?
Well, first of all, the teacher, even under Kennedy,
Yeah.
they're not allowed to coerce participation. So the teacher in a classroom cannot force every child in the classroom to participate
Sure.
in his prayer to Allah or to whoever else. If a teacher in a classroom wants to offer prayer before class, not outside of the class time, okay? Because remember, this coach wasn't praying during the game. This coach was praying on his off minutes. This was outside the time during which he was supposed to be doing school business.
But it was
So,
on their property.
It was on the property, but that's another matter. The if a teacher wants to pray in his classroom before class starts, he can do that, or she can do that, whoever. But they cannot They cannot force any child to be in that classroom while they're doing it, or to pray with them.
Okay.
So there's that. Is in response to you, Ed, I would say I'd borrow the words of Jesus and say this we ought to have done without leaving the other undone. Our kids, at least the kids that are going to public school, they're spending more time with their teachers than with their parents typically.
Yeah.
And if the teachers are forced by the state to constantly force an atheistic worldview on them, prayer with the parents will go a long way toward correcting that. But how much better would it be if Bible studies in schools were allowed? If the children were allowed to get together and have a Bible study, during recess? Those things have been prohibited for a long time under the establishment of religion. And that's the big part of this case for me, is we are allowed to engage in these kinds of things. So
That's true. That's a good point.
But I do want to say that, and it's not to correct anybody, but I do know that I have participated where if a child in the school starts a club, it could be Bible club, it could be, Christian-based club, that they can invite anybody to be a participant in that club for the basis of the club. And I know that we were allowed in the Bible club, and so they had me as one of the leaders. It was student initiated,
mhm.
and so periodically we would be able to sit and have lunch with them. And so then their friends would come around and ask, "What's this all about?" And then it would allow the opportunity to explain what Bible Club was, as long as we had that guideline to say, this is what we do, and everybody's open to come after school, but it was on school property. So I know that was going on even with the confinement of the laws. So how does this broaden that, though?
Yeah, and I'm going to elaborate on that same question, because I think we're asking the same question. I'll put a different spin on it. Does that mean that teachers can maybe initiate? Because it sounded like what you were doing was, or what you were saying is, the students have to form this club.
They do.
In light of this, does that mean teachers can potentially start a Bible study? Because if that's the case, then we as pastors and as Christians, we need to be empowering our public school teachers with the knowledge and the resources to do just that.
As I read Kennedy, as long as it's being done outside of official class period time, yes.
Okay.
The teacher can participate. The teacher can even
Well,
take
this
a
is
lead
big.
position.
This is huge.
Just
That
as
is
long
big,
as
yeah.
they don't
Force,
coerce
yeah.
participation.
Of course.
And in regard to the Bible club in the school anyway, probably nobody had sued over that.
Oh no,
But
they
if-
tried. They did. They
Yeah, okay.
tried, and it was upheld.
Okay, by what? The state court? Was it a state court or a federal one?
Both.
Okay.
And I had I had the documentation. I have it at home
Okay. That
because the principal
Mm-hmm.
was concerned
Mm-hmm.
that and the principal was a Christian, but the principal was concerned that they were their job was on jeopardy
Mhm.
because of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I gave them the laws that already were passed down
Right.
for that. And so basically, when the administration came and passed the laws, and nobody even came to say anything. And then when parents, did complain, it was brought to their attention that they have a legal right to do this. Nobody's forcing anybody to participate. It's
Mhm.
open to whoever wants to participate. But on the same token, it's not being forced. And that was the emphasis,
Mhm.
is that
Right.
and the basis is that if they're going to allow science club, then they had to allow any other type of club,
Mm-hmm.
and then they had chess club, and they had French club, and they had all these other clubs.
Right.
So Bible club, it wasn't based on religion. That was the test.
Mm-hmm.
It was based on people that came together to speak about the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was brilliant. But anyway.
Under the Kennedy ruling, if the teacher wants to say to his class, "Hey, if any of you wants to come pray with me before class period tomorrow, I'm going to be praying between this time and this time. Feel free to come join me." He can do that.
That's great.
You know.
Yeah.
So, but
Scary too.
That
I know.
club type of thing.
Yeah.
What a lot of people were scared of. He was probably scared. The principal was probably scared of the endorsement test. That would have passed Lemon. I doubt it would have passed the endorsement test though. And both of those are overturned.
Yeah.
No.
Well, now
So we're good.
We're good regardless.
Mhm.
And I know that the Good News Club is something that's been started, and basically what they had to do, because I don't know what happened. I think somebody tried to challenge it, and maybe it didn't pass one of those tests. Is that they were looking for churches that would do a Good News Club after school, and then allow the children to come to the church as a facility, so it was off of the school property.
Mhm.
And they were looking for schools that were close.
Now that's a little
Percentage.
different because the school is cooperating with a church,
Mhm.
and that seems like a government entanglement with religion, which wouldn't have passed the Lemon test or the endorsement
Yeah.
test.
That's one of the reasons why, because we have a lot of public school teachers in this
Mhm.
church, and that's one of the reasons why we haven't been able to do anything, because the school won't do
Mhm.
anything. Like they won't bus the kids here. They won't do anything because they see it as entanglement.
Well, another good school case from the Supreme Court just a few weeks ago prohibited states from preventing school voucher funds from going to religious schools.
Yeah, that was Maine.
So, yeah, it's the main case that
Okay.
he's talking
Yeah.
about. Yeah. So that's another issue. I mean, we're going basically back to what it was when the Constitution was first adopted, which is where education and the church work together, or were allowed to work together, just so long as nobody imposed or coerced their particular brand of faith upon somebody else.
Well, now we got to be careful too, because I want to mention this: is that even though we have these freedoms, I know that some parents might have their children in homeschooling and think, well, now it's a good time to get them into, public schooling. I'm an advocate that homeschooling is the best schooling if you have a faith-based, strong unit and you have parents that are able to do it. Now, I know that all parents are not capable of doing that, and I know that there's some really good homeschooling networks out there, but would that be something that a homeschool could approach the school to say, I want to start this club?
As I read Kennedy, I don't know that any particular outside person couldn't start a club at the school. As long as students aren't being coerced to participate in religious expressions, if a coach can pray at the 50-yard line, someone who is not affiliated with the school could exercise their religion on school property as well. It seems to me so.
Well, I think we've talked a lot, exhausted some, but we still haven't solved any problems. But we appreciate you joining with us and taking time to listen. I'm sure we'll come back and visit this because this is an important topic. There's a lot of things going on, education, our rights here as Americans and as kingdom citizens. So, friends, thanks for joining us on this time.